Welcome back to our special focus on Thabo Bester this afternoon here on Today on eNCA. Selina Lomasikane, let's continue our conversation, and Muloko Mulodal rope you in as well. I mean, you were at the Lanseria airport as all of that was happening. Slee, take us through that commotion and what happened.
Well, in essence, what we saw play out at the Lanseria International Airport was much anticipation and whether our sources had actually given us the correct information, because at that point we did not know what time that chartered plane was going to arrive, but we knew that it was going to be somewhat after midnight or in the early hours of the morning. But just after midnight, we got certain confirmation while we were staking out that airport at around 2:30, seeing many of the security personnel and police starting to secure the airport, that in fact Bester and Dr. Nandipa was certainly en route. We were actually watching, or should I say monitoring, the movements of the plane through an app to see just how far it was, and just after 4 a.m. That particular chartered plane landed at Lanseria International Airport. Thabo Bester was whisked away in a police nyala. They were under heavy police guard, as well as a police helicopter that was tracking the movement of that police convoy to the Kgosi Mampuru prison, as well as Dr. Nandipa then being put in a smaller vehicle and her convoy rushing to the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court so that she would be able to make her first appearance on Thursday.
And obviously, Muloko, I need to rope you in here as well. There was a lot happening while you were camping at the airport, waiting for Bester's arrival, and you captured all of those visuals of the chartered flight arriving. What else did you notice?
Well, the reality is that there wasn't really much activity, particularly outside the airport itself. Much of the action was happening inside. Those police high security were inside when the plane landed. But outside, really, the road in front of the very same airport, and as you drive towards the N14, not much was happening. At some point, as we were driving towards Pretoria, it was totally empty. You would see one or two vehicles coming from Pretoria towards the Johannesburg direction, and I even suspected, seeing that there was that police chopper that was there, my suspicion was that they possibly were going to fly those pair from Lanseria International Airport with that particular police chopper into Kgosi Mampuru prison facility. That obviously did not happen. They were driven, and as I said, they utilized a different entrance just to make sure that the media doesn't get the glimpse of those as they are being driven inside the Kgosi Mampuru prison. We understand that Thabo Bester is under 24-hour surveillance at the Kgosi Mampuru prison. And here at this particular prison in Kroonstad, this is where Dr. Nandi is. She is here because this is a facility that is able to accommodate the women inmates. And tomorrow she's going to be leaving from here when she goes to Bloemfontein to appear alongside the other accused, including her father. We understand, obviously, because she's a trial awaiting trial prisoner, she is certainly going to be transported by the police, not necessarily the correctional services officials. But rest assured, security is going to be very tight as she will be transported from here to appear in Bloemfontein, because they wouldn't want to leave anything to chance. We heard already Thabo Bester, through his lawyer, when he appeared in court last week on Friday, saying that he fears for his life. He suspects that he is going to be poisoned, and this obviously raising a whole lot of curious questions. What does he know? Why would people want to kill him? Who are these people he suspects would want to take his life? And we were told that he doesn't want to eat prison food, but we saw the statement by the Correctional Services Department late, I think it was yesterday, saying that no, this man is now eating there's no issue regarding him not wanting to eat prison food. And what South Africans as well, I guess many of them were disappointed with, was that Thabo Bester, when he first appeared in court, William, wanted to personally address the court. Obviously, he was aware that there was media presence, and South Africans felt like it was unfair for the court to turn down that particular offer by Thabo Bester, because surely we would have wanted to know exactly what he would have wanted to say.
Slindelo, let me come to you. I mean, you've spoken to family members of Dr. Magudumane. What is the family's response to what is unfolding? What have you heard?
You know what's interesting for me in particular is that I had a conversation with Dr. Nandipha Magudumane's father initially when it was official that Dr. Nandipha was on the run. She was nowhere to be found. There was an Instagram post where she had told her clients that she was going to be returning to work on the 29th of March. I went to her practice, but obviously she was not there, staff was not there, and from what we understand, it remains closed. But the conversation I had with her father then was that he was telling me that, you know, he's aware of what's going on. He's worried about his daughter. The last conversation they had, she was checking up on her mom and whether she's okay. I blatantly asked him, were you aware that your daughter was involved with a convict? Were you aware of the fraudulent businesses and schemes that they were up to, and that she had a role in his escape from the Mangaung prison? And he said no. So subsequently, weeks later, we now have the police rounding him up with a G4S employee as some of the suspects and accomplices who played a pivotal role in that escape. I also had a conversation with Dr. Nandipha's brother, who's also quite interesting. Nathi Sekeleni, in fact, Nkosi Nathi Sekeleni had initially written a Facebook post exposing his sister. His sister then subsequently took him to court where he had to retract the statement. But in that statement, he, in essence, had told the world that his sister was involved with Thabo Bester and that they were running fraudulent businesses through her aesthetics business, and that, you know, she was supporting him while he was in prison. He says that this was his way of trying to alert authorities and anyone who could listen. I even asked him whether at some point he tried to extort his sister, and he said the message he had written to her asking or demanding 100,000 rand to keep quiet was simply out of frustration, and that he was emotional. Let's take a listen.
Do you dispute that you were extorting your sister for money to keep this a secret?
Like I said, I was intoxicated, and I don't even remember what I was doing because of the emotions I was going through. And,
so are you saying when you sent her the WhatsApp message where you were demanding money, you were intoxicated?
Yes, I was intoxicated. I was very intoxicated because I was going through the thing of losing a place, and I was quite very emotional. Because on that night, when I even called the cops that night. My friend who I won't mention his name, but I called the cops that night because while we were in the cottage, Unandipha called Utumi. Tumi, you can explain this one, the call that was made by Unandipha to you guys.
Slee, you've also spoken to Thabo Bester's mother. I mean, she hasn't seen her son in some time. What was her reaction when she saw him appear in court?
She was very, very empathetic, I could say. I think as a parent at first, what was interesting is that we were first trying to figure out if it really was him. So for a moment, she was really looking closely at the screen, trying to pick out features that she would recognize. And as soon as she looked into his eyes, she said, "That is my son in the dock." And she just immediately became quite sad. She was talking to me about how she didn't appreciate how he was being handled, saying that, you know, as a mother, she understands that he needs to pay for the things he's done, that, you know, it was wrong for him to escape from prison. But as a mother, you know, she certainly doesn't want to see her child being treated in this way or going through what he's going through. But her hope is that perhaps this time around he may be able to change, and perhaps if ever he comes out of prison legally, he would come out as a changed man. Let's take a listen.
Yeah.
Maybe then tell me how you feel.
Good luck for bona. Whether to outside boni work about scampon santo till tumpolai. About a dress to one little polai. The manga mang. I said it, we sent to Tempima. I said it, a single Rachalum once over Nalam, and then I'm made one by tongue and Naxoka Trunco, and to the Tanalito. Kibonagaro, what crook up a waiter in Kim, make him try the Akere, had yet, and that the end, have I didn't know. I go very Hakimu bone, guitar Hakimu bone, Hakibonum Pilova plan. Go no Hakim Shabella court, even the court hold. Kita rumah lah bat pabang habu bat yang mutai, na never kai, but I cannot believe you. I cannot. I'm sure to believe like you because I can't understand Twiki Bonan TV. Eglo Bonan life to Bajo.
Well, look, let me come to you now. I mean, lots of questions for Home Affairs as these two individuals made a dash across the border and were apprehended in Tanzania. Minister Aaron Motsoaledi himself holding a briefing. What's his answer to how these two skipped the country undetected?
So, William, maybe let's start here because Home Affairs obviously is the one that controls or registers our births. Even when we die, Home Affairs must know. A lot of people were saying, who exactly is Thabo Bester? You would recall that there were reports that Thabo Bester, the fugitive, the infamous Thabo Bester, actually stole the identity of one man in Heidelberg who's named Thabo Bester. So the minister first started during his media briefing on Friday to explain that they have had to go into their database and they found that there are two Thabo Besters in South Africa. The first one is a 19-year-old, a teenager they really did not even bother to pay a visit to because it was clear that it would not be the person they are looking for. They then went to Heidelberg and they managed to speak to the other Thabo Bester, who is about 40 according to the minister. And it turned out that no, that man's identity had not been stolen. And Slindelo Masikane, having interviewed the mother of Thabo Bester, according to Minister Motsoaledi, that interview assisted them so much that they have had to go there as officials of the Home Affairs Department to speak to her. And she then insisted, as she did during the interview with Slee, that she is the mother of the man who is being sought by authorities. She told them, according to the minister, about the exact date on which she gave birth to Thabo on the 13th of June 1986 in Soweto at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital. Motsoaledi says they went there and upon their arrival they indeed found in the archived records of the hospital that indeed on that particular day a woman called Maria Macy Bester gave birth to a baby boy named Thabo Bester on that particular day. However, we know that his mother is now using Mabaso surname. Now, the minister is saying Thabo never had a South African ID. He also never had a South African passport. And this was because even the mother herself did not have a South African ID for a very long time. This surely should not alarm anyone because there are many people who did not manage during apartheid to get identity documents or even birth certificates immediately. They have had to apply for those documents late. Now, after she had been assisted to get her very own ID document, that is the mother, Thabo is the first of 4 children that Macy gave birth to, according to the minister. And when then she started the process of applying for ID documents of her children, at the time Thabo, who was I think 16, had already left her home, and she only applied for the other 3 siblings. One has already passed, unfortunately. Now Thabo, it is in that context that he never had a South African ID. And the minister says they even went to one Liar school in south of Johannesburg. That's where Thabo did his primary school. Records indicate that he only studied up to grade 5. And on that basis, they were convinced that indeed Thabo Bester is real, he is a South African, and the minister even saying that he is eligible to receiving a South African identity document. However, that can only happen if he wants one. Now, the issue of them having escaped, it started with Thabo Bester last year in May, and initially, it would appear that even the authorities were not even aware that Thabo escaped. They believed that he was the person who burned in that particular prison cell. But later, last year, it emerged that actually that person who burned in there did not die. I mean, for the Judicial Inspectorate of the Correctional Services to even be aware to write that report already, you would want to believe that the minister, the deputy minister, everybody who matters ought to be aware in the Correctional Services Department. Now, here's the thing. These two escape from, he escapes from the correctional facility and he stays in South Africa. The irony here is that he stayed in Hyde Park, a street away, William, from the residence of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So he was essentially a neighbor of the _1 citizen while he was hiding. And it was only after his picture of him was taken at a retail store in Sandton that this couple decided to leave the country. And at that time, nobody knows exactly how they skipped the country. And I asked Minister Motsoaledi to say, Minister, as Home Affairs, it's your responsibility to secure our borders. That responsibility lay squarely with you as the department. How exactly did they escape? And of course, he says there's no evidence indicating that they officially exited the country. She had a passport, Dr. Nandipa, official passport. She did not use that particular passport to exit South Africa. That on its own says that she skipped the country illegally. We don't know whether she went to the other side along the borderline and jumped the Limpopo River, or she was, along with Thabo, assisted to go through the Beit Bridge border post or any other of the border posts in the country. The minister now responding by saying, look, at that time, there was no way we could know. In fact, in his words, he says, we had no interest about this too. And that is bizarre if you consider the fact that the Home Affairs Department, along with other departments such as the Justice and Correctional Services Department, the police, as well as the South African National Defence Force, they are part of the security cluster. You would assume that once there's a problem of that magnitude, fair enough, you cannot expect the minister to know what happens, or the Director General, what happens on the daily basis, people's movements in the country. But surely there should have been, during their cluster meetings, to say, activate that, activate this, so that we all work together to ensure that we capture these people. It doesn't look like such was ever discussed, because the minister is saying we didn't know, we had no interest whatsoever. That goes to show that government at times tend to work in silos, and it's not surprising, therefore, that these two managed to escape. Let's listen to Minister Aaron Motsoaledi there, as he was also saying that he is not ruling out the possibility that there could have been some delinquent officials from the Home Affairs Department who might have assisted the pair to skip the country.
When we learned from TV that there's a lady who appeared on TV and declared that is Thabo Bester's mother, we decided that maybe that could be the clue. We paid her a visit. And indeed, we paid a visit to Home Affairs. Indeed, she insisted that she's the mother of Thabo Bester. She even gave us his date of birth and told us that she gave birth to this gentleman at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital on the 13th of June, 1986. I've seen on several media that he was born somewhere between 1983 and 1986. He was actually born on the 13th of June, 1986. And indeed, we rushed to Bara Hospital and checked in their archives. And what this lady told us is true. Thabo Bester, if you go to archives in Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, you'll find him in the labor ward of the hospital. The date on which he was born and who gave birth to her and all that. So Thabo Bester does exist actually as Thabo Bester. And the mother in the records at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital was recorded as Macy Bester.
Aviwe, let's bring you in now. I mean, you've secured some documentation that shows the attempts that were made to secure a death certificate from Home Affairs for Thabo Bester when it first was thought and reported as such. I mean, that he died in his cell. What did you uncover?
As you put it, William, we've got a number of documents at our disposal that clearly shows, in fact, that the prescripts of the Correctional Services Act was not followed. The first thing that was supposed to happen ordinarily is that an inquest into the death happens. Of course, that will thoroughly look at the situations and the circumstances around the death, find out if the person in the cell, in fact, was the one that did, especially if it's an unnatural death, such as the faked death of Thabo Bester. So all of these entities are supposed to look at it thoroughly and come out to the conclusion of what exactly happened and who the said inmate is. But judging by these documents, some of them from, of course, the documents that are handed in at Home Affairs when one person dies and they try to get that death certificate. Another is just affidavits, even from G4S on what happened, and the also important autopsy that we have at our disposal. And they're all indicating that that inquest and that investigation, thorough investigation, the prescripts while around correctional services was not followed. Ordinarily, the South African Police Service has to conduct the investigation itself, but as the people that run the prisons and the correctional services facilities, correctional services itself, the department is supposed to conduct an investigation. But G4S is the one that runs the Mangawing Correctional Services Center, is also supposed to conduct its investigation. But the watchdog of correctional services, that's the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services, is supposed to be the overarching body that ensures that all these investigations are done. But it's clear from what we've uncovered is that it's all been done in silos. For example, the autopsy came out on the 4th of May last year, 2022, just a day after Thabo Bester faked this death. Already, the indication there was that it's not Thabo Bester, and the person that was found in that cell, that charred body, was already dead by the time that fire actually happened. But around the same time, Department of Correctional Services releases a statement suggesting that Thabo Bester had succumbed to the death via suicide in the cell. Also, the affidavit that we have from G4S suggests that Thabo Bester, officially saying that he died, and he died in that cell. A lot of detail came out, for example, on the 1st of July. We do know that the official DNA confirmed that the person there was not Thabo Bester, but all of this was kept mum, as we do know all these officials, actually all these bodies knew exactly, had an indication that Thabo Bester had escaped, but all of them chose to keep mum. In fact, let's take a listen to some of the experts that we've been having on the channel around this time and find out their sentiments on exactly what may have happened.
Is that the height of Thabo Bester is around 1.7, whereas that of deceased in the cell is 1.45. You cannot release a crime scene, until all the parties that process that particular crime scene are satisfied, and they discuss among themselves that from the collection of the evidence until the results are coming back from the lab that provides with the conclusive evidence that indeed, all the other aspects are covered, such as the physical evidence, fingerprints, and in this case, we can see that, the person was already dead, when the fire was set alight, and also the report indicated that the person died because of a blunt object.
There's no doubt that Bester and his accomplices worked with a variety of people, including people from the Department of Correctional Services, empowered to control the prison, including people possibly working with the morgue and other state entities. And there's also reports that there were 3 other bodies that were previously removed from that particular morgue in Bloemfontein. That raises a number of questions. Clearly, these people are cunning, calculated criminals, and they need to be brought to book.
You can see that there's a lot of cover-ups whereby the prison itself has got CCTV cameras, but they were switched off. So, and you know, to ban a particular body, you know, with a body, we've seen even with the stillborn babies, you need enormous fire.
Mangoma Mkhunu, let me come to you now. I mean, you covered the first court appearances of the main players in this case, Dr. Makudumane and Thabo Bester. Take us through how that process unfolded. What was their demeanor like as they entered the courtroom and listened to the proceedings?
Well, William, I can tell you that there was certainly a lot of anxiety from us journalists, not knowing much about how they're going to firstly arrive, you know, in court, and what was going to be the procedure. I think there was a you know, lack of information as far as that is concerned. In fact, I think authorities were keeping it quite close to their chest. We were only told when Dr. Nandi Makudumane had arrived, that she had in fact arrived at the police station. I think most of us had been waiting, stationed at the court where she was going to appear on that day at 2 o'clock, we're told. And that's when we discovered that she had actually arrived at Bloemfontein. We were then rushing to see if we can perhaps get a shot of Dr. Makudumane as she arrived with the convoy there at the police station. And I think I remember that we waited for quite a number of hours. We're told that she had been processed at the time by police. And I think there was a lot of anxiety, but also a lot of excitement, I think, from the many community members that we saw that also came around the police station that, you know, wanted to get a photo of Dr. Nandi Makudumane, that wanted to see this convoy. And I think there were quite a number of media colleagues that started to gather outside the police station. And I think at one point, I remember that we even devised a plan of how we're going to capture her coming out of this police station. And I think we opted that we're going to use one vehicle, one van that all of the media colleagues were going to climb into as soon as the convoy comes out. We're then going to follow this convoy up until she gets to court. And I think what was also very surprising, I mean, as far as the security that we saw around the court, there was a lot of police that were there, you know, at the police station itself. In fact, when we tried to go beyond the gate of the police station, we were told that we would not even be able to get through there. The journalists are not allowed there. There were some colleagues, I remember, that even wanted to use ablution facilities. They were not allowed to go past the main gate of the police station. And of course, we waited for hours to hear when she was going to finally be taken out through that convoy to the court. And it was about 1:45 in the afternoon when we were told that she was going to come out. And then there was a V1 vehicle that had gone out of the police station, and we were told this is her inside this vehicle. I remember all of us just running, you know, trying to follow that vehicle, only to discover, of course, that it was a decoy at the time. That's when, until we arrived in court, when we learned that, in fact, she had not arrived yet. So, but it gave us an opportunity to get a proper shot of her arriving in court. It was a lot of security, even in court, a lot of police officials around the court. When she arrived in court, she was whisked away inside the courtroom. And I remember that when we got into court, even there was a lot of security, even for journalists to come inside. You know, there was security. You had to have checks. You had made an application before you come to court. And to such an extent that some of the colleagues were left outside of court because of the strictness inside court. I remember seeing Dr. Nandi Makudumane arrive arriving in court. She was wearing a hoodie. She was wearing a surgical mask. You could hardly see her face. You could only just see a bit of her eyes when she came into court. For most of it, she was chained. Their legs were chained. She was appearing, of course, next to another worker, a former CCTV technician, Teboho Dipulu, who was also going to appear alongside Dr. Nandipha Makutumana. I remember both of them following each other inside court in chains, their legs chains, but their hands at the time were not chained. They then went into the dock, and I think all of us tried to engage them and to find, whether they had wanted to say anything, but there was no indication that Dr. Nandipha Makutumana had wanted to say anything to the media. In fact, she kept, was sitting and facing down for most of those proceedings. She stood up, I think, about twice when she was being addressed by the judge. And as soon as we got to court, the questions that were asked was, around the issue that could these cases then be joined, the two cases. You recall, William, that on Tuesday, there had been another appearance of Nandipha Makutumana's father, 65-year-old Zolile Sekeleni, as well as another former G4S employee, Sihone Muswara, who, of course, were also facing charges. So that was discussed in court, and eventually the court then ruled that the two cases could be joined. And it was quite a short appearance in court. It didn't last more than 10 minutes, and then the case was then postponed to the 17th of April. Dr. Nandipha Makutumana again being whisked away from court amid heightened security. I think we even saw police guards, the National Intervention Unit being there in court, and they were stationed even on top of seats at all the corners of that courtroom. And, you could just see how high risk an appearance this was in court. And of course, the court itself was packed to the rafters with people that had come just to see what was happening in court. And I think we also saw the similar scenes when Thabo Bester was appearing the next day. I think with Thabo Bester, it became clear that he was not going to be processed at the police station because he's already an inmate. He's an escapee from a correctional service. So we're told that his arrival, he was just going to go straight to court. So I think as the media, that's where we're stationed. We went straight to the court to wait for Thabo Bester to arrive. And we were told that it would be, in the next 30 minutes that it was going to be arriving. And I think I remember us camping there and just wondering if we were going to have the same difficulties that we had when Dr. Nandipha Makutumana was arriving in court. And I think the first thing that we saw on Friday, around the court, unlike Thursday, was that we saw a lot of policemen outside the court, on the corners, each and every corner of the court, outside of the precinct itself. There were policemen that were stationed there with, guns, and you could just see that, that was going to be quite a serious appearance, a high-risk appearance, a high-security appearance at the court. And I remember when Thabo Bester came, we could all see, because there were about 4 or 3 vehicles from the Correctional Services Department that had come into that gate. And then we saw the V1 that had been transporting Thabo Bester. It was quite hard to see him, but we could see just inside the car the number of, personnel and officials and guards that were there inside the car. I think about 6 of them, accompanied by members of the South African Police Services that were also inside the court. Also, when he arrived in court, it was quite fast. He was whisked away into the court by the heavy, security personnel that was around the court and the police. And I think we then rushed inside the court just to ensure that, we get inside the court. We had to wait, I think, for close to over an hour just to get inside court under strict security. We were told that we're going to be moving courts because Thabo Bester had to appear from under the cells, and they couldn't risk that he walked with the officials from the cells to the court where he had been appearing, unlike Dr. Nandipha Makutumana. So we moved to another court. And I remember that as soon as we got inside that court, we saw quite a number of police. There were about dozens, about over 20 police that were just inside court, stationed inside court. And as soon as Thabo Bester was called inside, we saw, firstly, about 12 of those correctional services officials, the SAPS officers that were there, that came just before he came out of, this holding cells. And they were the ones that led the way, obviously heavily armed. And that's where we first saw the images of Thabo Bester coming outside. And then as soon as he came outside, I think he had just looked around and he sat down. And for most of the proceedings, he was attentive. You could see that, there's a lot that, he at the time was going through or he wanted to express. I think we even saw him on a number of occasions raising up his hands. And that's when it emerged that he had actually wanted to address the court. His lawyers indicating to the court that Thabo Bester had wanted to talk. And the request obviously was not granted by a magistrate, who said that it's the lawyers that should do the talking for him. In fact, she said it's the mouthpiece of Thabo Bester. So the lawyers then conveying that Thabo Bester had raised issues around his safety and the fact that he had not eaten for over 24 hours. And this was because of the fact that, he feared for his life, he feared for his safety, and the fact that it was going to be, at the time, believed that was going to be going at a correctional service that he had been at, where he escaped from. So that's the reason why he had not even eaten the food that was provided to him. Also issues around his extradition, that he had wanted some of the documentation to be given to him. And I think for most of the time, we saw Thabo Bester either nodding when he was in disagreement with what was being said in court, calling his lawyers, speaking to his lawyers. But for most of the time, I think quite attentive, William, looking as those proceedings were happening. And of course, we saw quite a number of people, even outside court, just waiting to catch a glimpse of Thabo Bester. I think when he arrived, people were screaming. Even when he left, the convoy left, the people were screaming and shouting and taking videos. And that just told you of the public interest that this matter had created around outside court. And also in terms of the high risk that Thabo Bester had, been appearing at the court. And the matter was then postponed, of course, after the state had not wanted to entertain any of the issues that Thabo Bester had raised, saying that he should have raised those issues with the relevant authorities, that being Home Affairs as well as Correctional Services, because he was now under the care of the Correctional Services, being an inmate. Of course, the issue of bail, that issue was raised in the state, saying that there is no need for him to apply for bail, given that he's already convicted of a crime. Instead, they're going to continue. So the case was postponed to the 16th of May, and this is for further investigations to be made into this matter. Of course, the state saying that the investigation is quite broad. They'll still need to consider many other aspects. It was not joined at this particular point with that of the other 4 accused who will be appearing in court tomorrow to start those bail processes because of the high risk of this particular case and the fact that, the police are saying that already Thabo Bester has been convicted of a crime.
Viewer, let me bring you in. I mean, this week you also covered the Parliamentary Committee sitting, combing through, call it the details of what happened and seeking answers. What were the main issues explored by members of Parliament?
Well, very interesting discussions and revelations that we heard over those 2 days, going into the evening on both days. While parliamentarians were trying to piece together the circumstances around the actual escape of Thabo Bester, you find out that a number of issues, of course, for example, Dr. Nandi Pamakudumana going to the mortuary and taking 3 bodies. We understand that one of them was taken at these mortuaries in Free State on the 8th of April, went on to be found dumped around the 9th with still the mortuary tag on there. Some of those revelations. And of course, we then went on to hear that Thabo Bester actually planned this escape and actually asked to be moved to a single cell. Remember that he was moved to that famous cell, cell 35, on the 30th of April. The first application that he made was on the 15th of April to be moved to this cell. And a number of incidences happened. We do understand there's an unauthorized vehicle that we know of, suspected to be the one that was bringing in the body that was then went on to be claimed as the Thabo Bester body. But just on moving to the cell itself, it was granted on the grounds that he suggested that he was being intimidated inside by the 26 gang. He suggested that he hadn't paid the protection fee and therefore needed to be moved to isolation. So the Mangaung Correctional Center itself has 70 single cells, but he was moved to this specific cell 35 for a particular reason. One is that it's near an emergency exit, and the second thing is that the CCTV footage is far off, so you can see poorly what happens in this particular cell if you are then placed there at the cell 35. Makes it much easier to maneuver, especially if you are planning this elaborate escape. So another thing then, a number of occurrences that we found out happened and that parliamentary setting is that the times as well that the CCTV footage itself was altered, and in fact the specific footage that looks into the cell around cell 35 did not work from 1938 on, that's the 2nd of May, the evening of course of the escape, up until early hours, 4 o'clock. That's more than 8 hours then on the 3rd of May that the footage didn't coincidentally happen there. As you know, these members of parliament were then cross-questioning these panels. Of course, on the 2 days, we saw presentations from G4S as they run the MMC prison itself. We heard from DCS. We heard from the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services as well as the police. So as these cross-questionings was happening there, you heard even discrepancies around the times. For example, we are told by G4S that the fire happened at around 4 a.m. on the 3rd of May last year, but it came out as these parliamentarians actually did a site visit, going to the Mangaung Correctional Centers themselves a week before the actual sitting that we had now just last week. So what they found there is that the time didn't correlate. As we do understand, it's supposed to have happened at around 2:30 on the evening. It was reported at 2:59, but G4S saying that this happened much later. In fact, it was heated discussions, as you'd heard Glendis Bederbach from the Democratic Alliance having pointed questions not only to the G4S managers, but also to people like Ronald Lamula as well as Minister Pegicele, just on their role and why they've been dragging their feet. Because crucial to this is that, of course, there is this serial killer on the run, also a murderer on the run, and it was clear that all these officials knew earlier on. In fact, the autopsy just on the following day suggested that the body that was found in that cell was not Thabo Bester, and in fact that body was dead before the actual fire. But the DNA came back on the 1st of July, and the police had this at their disposal. In fact, they presented this to the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services on the 10th of August, suggesting that the DNA is already saying that that's not Thabo Bester, and the autopsy, the one that came out on the 4th of May, already painted that out. So it was clear that Bester had escaped. But they were told to keep it mum, and of course they said that they tried to point it out to Minister Ronald Lamula on the 26th of October via an email, with another email also happening on February. None of those responded to, but there were phone call conversations between Judge Cameron and Minister Lamula that talked of what had happened, but still nothing came out. And you can expect that, of course, at least the victims would be alerted of Thabo Bester, of his escape, and also the public, of course, but none of that happened. That also urged Judge Cameron to then, of course, leak this to ground up, and it saw it then been blown to the public. But I wanted to take a listen to one of these engagements between the DA's Glendis Bederbach as well as Minister Pegicele.
Please don't lecture me on what the police do and don't do. I know what they do, I know what they don't do. I did it for years. You can teach me nothing about police investigations, with respect. Secondly, and I'm glad you take the point, and I'm glad that you concede it. It's an absolute disgrace that the victims of this man were not warned, were not prepared, were not protected. It's an absolute disgrace, and you should hang your head in shame, all of you. It's no way to treat people. But the most important thing is, answer me this. If while you were so busy protecting the secrecy of your investigation and deciding not to warn the South African public, who incidentally expect all of us here to protect them, and we've all failed, all of us. If Bester had murdered another woman, had raped another woman, what would you have said then?
Well, I'm not a speculator. That has not happened. Yes, it did not happen. And secondly, I know you are a prosecutor, a vintage one for that matter. But don't tell me about investigating in the police. You only deal with that after they've investigated. Yes, prosecution, indeed, but investigation, absolutely no, not for you.
Certainly a heated exchange there. Slindelo, let me come back to you and Moloko. You guys are getting ready to give us another court installment in the saga tomorrow. Take us through the list of people in the dock tomorrow.
So we've got 4 people in the dock tomorrow, William. We've got Dr. Nandipa, we've got her father, a former G4S employee, as well as a CCTV technician. Their cases have been put into one. They appear differently, as you've heard from my colleague Mangoba Mkhunu. And tomorrow we are expecting a possible bail application from either of the accused. And of course, we're going to see if any more charges are going to be added. But if there isn't going to be a bail application, then we are expecting brief proceedings, another postponement perhaps, but of course all eyes now are on law enforcement, as well as the internal investigations at DCS in terms of rounding up everyone who was involved. We are seeing that our sources are telling us that some of the close friends, close colleagues, associates of Dr. Nandipa are also being looked into. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how these investigations unfold and whether we're going to see any more arrests in this case. Of course, there's an expectation that there should be, because certainly it did not just take 4 people to pull this escape off. So tomorrow we will be broadcasting live, bringing our viewers live into the courtroom and giving, of course, more analysis into the expectations of what we can expect with these legal processes.
Thank you so much for your time. This has been the Thabo Bester Focus. And obviously, just before I let you go, Moloko, what's on the dock for you?
Well, I will be here in the morning to check the movement of Dr. Nandipa Makudumaman, who is currently inside this prison facility behind me. And she's certainly going to be under heavy security as she will be transported to Bloemfontein. But importantly, I think, William, for all of us and all South Africans to note, is that Dr. Nandipa Makudumana at this point in time is not guilty of anything. It is up to the criminal justice system to be able to convince the court that she is guilty of all the charges that she faces. And we know that it is going to certainly be very difficult for both sides to try to battle it out in court. And as far as the issue of bail is concerned, particularly for Dr. Makudumana, I can say it without a shadow of doubt that the state is going to oppose a bail application by her, because already she has proven to be a flight risk. She was caught in Tanzania already. The state has had to spend a lot of money. I mean, this too had to fly through a luxurious Falcon 900B. That is the type of an airplane that transports presidents, William. Now, the fact that the authorities have had to get down and go beyond the borders looking for her, it's certainly going to work against her if she were to apply for bail.
Slee, just as a parting shot, are there more arrests to follow? Do you know?
Our sources are telling us that we can expect more arrests. It's just a matter of how these police investigations are unfolding. There are a lot more G4S employees that are being looked into, as well as correctional services officials who did not do their oversight or perhaps also played a role in this particular escape, as well as, like I said, associates of Dr. Nandipa that are also being looked into.
A big thank you to Slindelo Masikane, Avium Dila, Moloko Moloto, and Mangoba Mkhunu on this special focus on Thabo Bester. We're going to move on to our bulletin for the moment.